I would like to thank George and the IPinCH staff for giving me an opportunity to present these ideas. And of course, to all the SFU faculty, including Eldon here, who have welcomed me to the faculty as an instructor and sessional instructor. I will talk today about this project of recognition, the problem of recognition of intangible heritage in the lowland populations of Peru. Or another name, something else is rotting in the Amazon. Of course, the first phase, a big phase of the destruction of the Amazon is mostly in Brazil, an open land with cutting the forest for cattle. In the last 10 years, this problem is having very big impact in the Amazon of Peru. Now, here we have, glad to have the presence of Michael Brown, lots of experience in the Amazon of Peru. Logging and that kind of industries have done some damage to the Amazon, but nothing like what is going on today with oil and gold and formal plus informal mining. Okay, so it's a very important problem. It is a topic that combines anthropology, legal issues, and politics. Politics mostly in the not in bad sense, but in the sense of a negotiation of the political baggage these groups have, including the group of the government. The governments do have a strong political baggage that needs to be dealt with the local populations. It dwells on intellectual property as much as physical property. And the issue in the lowlands is mostly trying to prove that there is a physical property to defend or to establish an identity to. These are societies, complex in their own way, but they're hunter-gatherers, right? So their physical property is not as tangible as the Machu Picchu. And so when a government official wants to say the cultural heritage of a lowland population, he wants something like Machu Picchu or perhaps a bit smaller. But he wants to see something. He wants to see pots. He wants to see material things. And it's difficult for them to understand. For a government official, you might understand governments are perhaps the most difficult partners in these negotiations because of their lack of knowledge, because of their different criteria. It's very difficult to make them understand that having 500 square kilometers for hunting and gathering is part of their property, is what they need to have and keep 500 or more if that is needed. Of course, that is a random number. Okay, so in as much artifacts are the product of long traditions, local techniques, ideas of cosmos, artifacts, cultural heritage, arrows, feather artifacts are the embodiment of tradition, techniques, rituals, materialization of their superstructure. What we find mostly is in the 19th century, every museum in the world was gathering artifacts from the lowlands, feathers, but what they were actually gathering was part of their superstructure, part of their ideology put into the material world. Of course, museums really didn't have an understanding of what these things meant, and everybody was good. The Vatican Museum has a fantastic ethnological museum made by missionaries that were bringing back things to Rome, and that's only one case. The integrity of the latter issues, the superstructure, the cosmogony, the ideology of these societies depends on the persistence of artifacts, on the existence of artifacts, of course, in their original context. And that is quite an important thing. Where do I come from? Well, one word comes to mind. This guy is very unstable. All right. So basically, I came to Vancouver 2 years ago from Rome, and before that, Kosovo and Bosnia. I was looking for the rainforest, and here it is. Not the lowland Peruvian rainforest, but this one. And so Canada has been for 2 years now my place. So most of my experience starts in Peru with archaeology and then moves on to Europe with cultural heritage in Kosovo or in Eritrea as teaching and cultural heritage as well. In Rome, it's mostly working with mass tourism and risk management. Rome is a city that gets 17 million people a year. So mass tourism is a problem for cultural heritage. There is a whole philosophical debate about what mass tourism means to cultural heritage in places not as fragile as this one, but Pompeii and Herculano, and mostly the answer is, well, in the future, tourists, visitors will not be able to visit the real thing, because obviously there's a risk involved, but that is a whole different problem. Or my experience in the Balkans after the war, with, in this case, this is Bosnia, not Kosovo, but this is Banja Luka, the capital of the Serbian part of Bosnia, the Bosnian Federation, where the population wants to build a new landscape. And you start building, the Serbian population wants to start building a new landscape doing this. Even destroying this tower was standing there after the destruction of the mosque. This is 95. So in the new capital, they tried to build a new landscape without Muslim. This was the third largest mosque in the Balkans and is completely destroyed. Now, to be fair to the Serbian population and their new landscape, their right to create their new landscape, they have the new Muslim neighbors the Muslims have been returning to Banja Luka, and in the hinterland of the city, mosques are being built again. But the one they do not want to build is the one in the center, the most important one, right? It will take 40 years. It will take 50 years. It takes a long time to reconcile these populations. Another current project I would like to briefly talk about is, as I teach Introduction to Prehistory, to world cultures, is the fact that in my course, 40% of the content is cultural heritage. I see no point of looking at pyramids without their social context. Pyramids in the past, but pyramids today. And I have always to start my classes with a book that says the past is a foreign country, and obviously it's not. We are surrounded by the past, and we need to deal with that on a daily basis. My students who have 40% of their time dealing with current issues about cultural heritage, how things are destroyed every day, and how things are built to promote, of course, cultural heritage. And very interesting, the responsibilities of academia. Narcisse was mentioning it. Just an example. No, I don't think Eldon has, but the new BC Premier is a student of SFU. Some of our faculty might have taught her the things she knows about archaeology and prehistory, or anthropology, or cultural heritage for that matter. Well, let's make sure that in government she remembers those things, right? And that's the responsibility Narcisse was mentioning about academics, of forming these people who are not going to be archaeologists. Well, just 2% of your students are going to be archaeologists, anthropologists, or cultural heritage. The others will have professions all over the spectrum. Important issues, of course. This project, as it was conceived, is in worse situation now with all the ideas. Very interesting, the Pyburns mode of self-effacement, right? Getting away and leaving everything. This is extremely important. It is part of I would say, the new way of doing this ethnography, an ethnography in which obviously the objective is not the publication of ethnographic data per se, but basically creating an engine for the evolution of those living ethnographies, really. So basically going in the process of collaboration, transmission of know-how, self-assessment, or perhaps, as I like to think, maybe the best, one of the options of this work of IPinCH is that whatever we contribute to in the know-how, in the production of knowledge is kept private by the populations you are advising. That is an option. That is an option that, as they have the support of IPinCH or other academics of the kind, they decide at the end to keep it private. They have developed, they have rediscovered their heritage, and they decide to keep it. And it's what happens, I think, with Australian paintings. Australian Aboriginal artists are painting, but they're not really explaining what those paintings mean, because the elders do not want to promote those ideas. So this is not traditional ethnography, of course. In the case of Peru, the indigenous populations are diverse because of historical context. They've had different paths to empowerment, and depending on their history and natural settings. The Andean communities were integrated after the invasion 500 years ago. The Andean communities today are mobile in the dynamics of the economy of the country. They're integrated into the country. And they have achieved a high degree of self-determination as a product of the 1970s. Arthur Manuel also was mentioning military governments in Latin America. Yeah, some were killing a lot of people. In Peru, no. In Peru, it was a socialist. They were military, socialist, corrupt, no? Inept. Yeah, but they were socialist, and they started the agrarian reform. No, an agrarian reform that took away the land, the large land tenures, to the local populations. Same thing, they expropriated the mines, they expropriated the oil fields. And since then, since the 1980, with democratic governments, these Andean communities have had a very, very broad leeway to make their rights heard. Now, the Amazonian groups is a different problem, because in the 1970s, the highland groups were only considered as the indigenous groups. Obviously, they can see them. The Amazonian groups could not be seen. They were down in the lowlands, but that is not exactly true. Michael Brown would tell me there's interesting missionaries in the 70s, the Summer Language Institute, a group of missionaries that records local languages, creates lexicons and books for the, but it's a small scale. So the Amazonian groups have been encroached. There is a Fitzcarrald film where you see they're big cutting, moving things for rubber plantations. But it is now, in the last 10 years, that there's an encroachment with a vengeance, really, in the process of mining gold and oil. So basically, the lowlands of Peru are all this here. Almost half the country is Amazonian. The part of the Amazonian basin. In the highlands, in the middle range, is where the 55%, 50 to 50% of the original native populations of Peru live. The native coastal populations are mostly gone. Okay, very few. Susan Bruning here, she carries the name of Henry Bruning here in the north coast of Peru, was the last person who recorded Muchica language of native coastals. The native coastal populations are mostly gone with their own traditions. The genes are there. They have survived, but their traditions are completely gone. And this is a map for the different characters that these societies in the jungle, in the Amazon basin, will have. Now, these images, the very famous one that came about 2 years ago, these images are probably being very common, but for PR reasons, they're probably not showing them. You see, because these are helicopters encroaching into the jungle and finding populations, pristine populations that have never seen Western people or whatnot. So this is they want to attack the helicopter where they're being photographed. And these things are probably happening by the day, only that they're not shown, because this creates a very strong impact. Perhaps not in Peru, where everybody more or less is benefiting from the economic boom, but in the world. Okay, there is a formal and informal mining that creates a lot of problem. In some sense, the informal mining is worse because there's no lack of control. In the case of the Amazon here, the locals, the local populations, the pristine populations are not involved in any case, because most of the people who work in the projects come from the highlands. Now, this is an essential problem, as I mentioned before, the difficulty of explaining the essential intangible heritage for lowland populations to the public. It is something that the lowland populations know, but it's something that the government will not understand. So part of the project is just that, serve as a means to officials to understand the importance of their tangible the tangible heritage of the populations they're encroaching upon. It's not only a matter of killing them, of course, it's killing their society, their culture. Another big problem in Peru is a transoceanic highway that comes from Rio. You will be, in 10 years, you'll be able to drive from Rio to the coast of the Pacific by highway. And this, of course, is encroaching a lot on pristine parks and lowlands in Peru. Now, this is a project, it's in its infancy. We're beginning. I'm alone on this project. I need to have partners. Yeah, it would be fantastic if you have graduate students that are interested in taking this over and doing it as a research, as with the problematic I'm following. And this is a map, for example, that shows how deep, how important the problem is. This is Peru is the pie, and those are the lots. Everything has been. Those are oil companies that are using the country as for their benefit, and it includes the Pacific and the lowlands, plus mining in the center. So it's a very, very important problem. There is a situation that is positive. In 2010, there was a new law called the Law of the Previous Consultation. The new president that took office in July is a real defender of local communities, much like Evo Morales in Bolivia. The thing is that Evo Morales is hated by indigenous populations too, because obviously he becomes the president. And as a president, you do have to do things that not everybody likes, including his partners in power, the indigenous populations. The law of the previous consultation is, for the first time, a decision to consult. Of course, any lawyer could say that consultation doesn't mean a thing. Obviously, we'll see what and it will help mostly. It will mostly help the Amazonian communities. So the new government promises, unlike the last one, promises to consult the local populations, and no cases are yet available to see how it really works. And just to reiterate about the Andean communities and how well they integrated into the modern system, the Andean communities are receiving a good chunk in money of the mining taxes. Okay, you could argue that the Andean communities have never been richer. However, money is not only the issue. Along with the money, along with big bank accounts for small municipalities in the middle of the Andes, they are having extremely big ecological problems. I mean, the mining produces an ecological disaster, and I suppose mining companies would prefer that those ecological disasters are paid for by the locals, which is not part of the law. So there's a lot of social conflicts. There are about 150 social conflicts in Peru now. That is to say, populations of the lowlands that are trying to fight the government against the lotization, the distribution of lands to oil companies. And the question, of course, of the project, and I think that is one thing I need to define, because define clearly the problem, is will governments understand the concept of intangible heritage, of isolated populations, intangible heritage that relates mostly to subsistence strategies, otherwise they wouldn't survive. This is a photo of the kind of confrontations. There are violent confrontations. This was 2-3 years ago in the north part of Peru. These confrontations, again, not promoted very much for bad PR for the government. They are quite common. The government has, of course, a list of intangible heritage, but they are features. The dance, a drink, this and that. And one of the things, along with trying to make them understand that landscape, somebody was talking about landscape, the area where they live is their intangible heritage, it is also important that these lists that are mostly geared towards the economy, towards being brands in the economic system, also have consider the context in which the concept of buffer zone, for example. A buffer zone, which is now, the concept of buffer zone is very common when you talk about tangible. You wouldn't admit Machu Picchu has a buffer zone. Any site for the World Heritage Organization, the UNESCO, that wants to be heritage needs to have a buffer zone that can protect the site in the last few years. Well, that has to happen also for intangible heritage. There needs to be a buffer zone, because otherwise these traditions will not be authentic, will not persist as such if their context is destroyed. The social network, for example. Interesting in this list that there's no languages, not one single language. And you might tell by any standards that the languages of the Amazon jungle, which are spoken by each group is 6,000 to 8,000, are endangered. Just by the numbers, these languages are endangered if they're also only spoken by 6,000 people, if it's a small group. Not a single language in this list. So that shows how apart the government is from these ideas of intangible heritage. And they only see the intangible heritage, these traditions, as very commercial things. These traditions, of course, occur within a set of physical circumstances, and there's no real interest in the history and the evolution of these issues. So the options for a research strategy are mostly, will depend, and these are the questions that I'm asking to follow up with this project. The strategy will depend on the local context, how much empowerment there is in the community, what is the degree of crisis they have, the character of the social conflicts. Another question is the role of researchers in these projects. Another option for the project is to just remain just circumscribe to the legal part, to legal issues, legal frameworks, in cases where the rule of law is available. In the case of this law of previous consultation, it would seem that there's a good atmosphere in order to check out, see how this works. Of course, these laws of consultation against the arguments of previous governments, where the mining and oil extraction was the national good. And for the national good, we'll do anything, right? The other option is a project such as this is just to monitor the evolution events and political interaction, or support the creation of a master plan. So these are the options that I'm presenting, so that a project like this, inspired by the will and ideas of IPinCH, could go on. Define the degree of involvement that one would have, or perhaps a project that could have a real impact in the political mobilization, no? As advisor to local groups, and why not also the government. So those are the options, and these options are what I get as I hear the experiences of IPinCH people. But most important, I think it's raise the awareness on intangible heritage, raise the awareness on how fragile it is, and raise the awareness that intangible heritage needs to be considered into a context, into a contextual setting with social networks, economic networks, which may have, in most cases, will not have any economic impact to the nation as a whole, but will have an impact to those little communities, those communities that need to survive in the future. So it's quite a complex problem, as you might understand, as many of the projects presented here. So a contextual approach to intangible heritage management. All right.